Welcome back to another episode of Even Tacos Fall Apart. I'm MommaFoxFire, and I am so glad you're here listening today. Whether you've been listening for a while or this is your first time tuning in, I want to thank you for showing up, because we all know how hard that can be sometimes. So grab a drink, take a breath, and settle in. Today's episode is going to be one that I think a lot of you will relate to and get something real out of. We're diving into something fundamental: communication and storytelling. That might sound a little bit abstract, but we're going to break it down in real terms. Whether you realize it or not, we all tell stories every day. It's in how we explain ourselves to others, how we make sense of what's going on around us, and even in how we understand our own experiences. Stories are a way of communicating, not just with the world, but with ourselves. When we own our story and learn how to express it, we gain power over our narrative, and that can be life-changing. Today's guest is Darius Wallace, someone who knows firsthand the power of communication through storytelling. Darius has had an incredible career as an actor, a speaker, and a coach, but he's also been through some heavy stuff. He's faced anxiety, depression, poverty, and the struggles that come with growing up in a place hit hard by economic collapse. He didn't just get through it, though. He used storytelling as a way to connect, to heal, and to find purpose. That's what we're talking about here today: how communication and storytelling aren't just tools for entertainment, but tools for survival and growth. If you've ever felt like no one really gets what you're going through, or like your voice doesn't matter, this episode is for you. Darius is going to talk about how owning your story can reshape how you see yourself and how others see you. This isn't about sugarcoating things or pretending like life isn't messy, because it is. But that's exactly why communication and storytelling are so important. When we're able to share our experiences, real, raw, and without filters, we create space for connection. And sometimes that's the first step to healing, to finding community, or even just taking the next step forward. We're also going to talk about how storytelling plays a role in mental health. Darius shares his personal journey of how performing, even when he didn't feel up to it, helped him manage his own anxiety and depression. And it's not just about telling stories for an audience. It's about how speaking your truth, whether that's to one person, a crowd, or even just to yourself, can shift your entire outlook. I know that this episode might challenge you to think about how you communicate. It might make you reflect on how much of your story you've been holding back, and what could happen if you started sharing more of it. And listen, you don't have to be a polished speaker or a professional actor to benefit from this. We're all capable of telling stories that matter, and those stories have the power to change lives, starting with our own. As always, we are keeping the chat open. If something hits home for you, or if you have questions, drop them in the comments wherever you're listening. Send me a message or tag me on social media. I'm MommaFoxFire everywhere. I would love to hear from you. This podcast isn't just about interviews. It's about creating a space where we can all share, connect, and grow together. Let's get into my conversation with Darius Wallace and talk about the power of communication through storytelling. That's okay. We'll get it going. It's not a good stream without some technical difficulties. Don't worry, because I will always bring the technical difficulties. All right, but welcome everyone. Welcome to another Mental Health Monday. Really excited for our conversation today. We are talking to Darius Wallace, and we're going to be talking about the power of communication through storytelling and some of the importance to mental health and well-being of kind of owning your story and how you tell it and how you frame it. So Darius, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time out.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Glad to be here, and glad to be here on this day, Memorial Day, and this month being Mental Health Month, and it being Monday.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's perfect to get the three M's there. We do have a question queue open, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop those in. Just type your question into the chat, and you can use exclamation point Q, follow that with your question. That'll put it into a place of higher visibility, but if you just put your question into the chat, I'll make sure to get to it too. But before we dive in, let me introduce you. So Darius is no stranger to stories. He's been in several Hollywood movies and is a founding company member of the Tennessee Shakespeare in Memphis, and he has performed all over the country in thousands of schools, universities, and theaters as Frederick Douglass. He has also been the TEDx Memphis coach for 7 years. He's a practitioner of Tai Chi and Qigong and teaches methods of self-improvement through meditation. Even though Darius has had all of these achievements, there was a time when he was broke and broken. He struggled with anxiety, depression, fear, limiting beliefs, and suicidal thoughts. He was born in Flint, Michigan during the time that the GM automotive shops were closing, which left families without jobs. And when he was 13 years old, he found himself involved with the mean streets of Flint, Michigan, which led him to being in a street gang. One day there was a miraculous intervention when the vice principal of the school gave him an alternative, the destiny of jail or the destiny of his dream. And Darius chose his dream, which was when he was introduced to his high school theater teacher, who taught him the power of communication through storytelling as an actor. And that is quite the introduction. If y'all are looking to connect on social media, I've got Facebook, LinkedIn, Threads, Instagram, website, all that good stuff. I'm going to post those into the chat, and y'all feel free to go connect, find out more about our lovely guest here today. But again, Darius, just thank you so much for taking the time out and being here.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I have a question for you. How in the world did you learn how to pronounce my name so perfectly? Because we haven't had a discussion about it. And normally people say Darius, Doris, Derez.
Yeah. I listened to your TEDx speeches.
Oh,
yeah. I was doing my research and I heard you say your own name. Like, how better to know how to pronounce someone's name than to hear them say it?
I appreciate that. It's a great sign that eventually the world will be trained in how to say it. You know, there's 8 billion people on the planet, and I'm the only person out of 8 billion that pronounces it Darius. Everybody.
Look, you gotta be unique.
Yeah. Great,
so
great.
that bio just like set up for all of these different things that you do. What do you enjoy doing when you're not busy with your speaking and your acting and your coaching practices?
Streaming movies.
Yeah.
Sitting back and streaming television show. I love stories.
Yeah.
So streaming television, streaming movies. You know, I do practice Tai Chi meditation. I do consider it a practice, though. So even though it brings a lot of serenity, what I really do when I really want to chill out is I stream.
Yeah.
And go into a space of nothingness and receptivity, because I love stories. So
yeah. Anything in particular you're watching lately that you're like, oh, more people need to see this?
Oh wow. You know, there's so many that's running through my head right now, and I'm bad with names. But there's this comedian, Gerard. Can't think of Gerard's last name right now, but he has a series on HBO, and he's a comedian. He kind of is like a Dave Chappelle, but very, very different. Like his comedy is very poignant. His pacing is very slow, but he sends out these jokes that bursts the audience into laughter, and he goes into the silence. And he did an HBO series of Coming Out.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's really moving and courageous. It's as his humor in his style of comedy is very courageous. When I first saw him, I was like, wow, this dude is amazing because he holds the space so elegantly and such a silent power. I've never seen anything like it. He's completely unique. He's not, I don't know if he's considered an A-list comic, you know what I mean? Because he's so off the wall, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
But he's brilliant. And so he does these HBO series, and this particular one is his coming out.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's so I would say watch it because it's not just the idea that he's coming out, it's self-acceptance is the universal message to the what's happening with him, and the courage to be okay with yourself, even if it means loss of family members. And I don't know how he's now seen in the community of comics. I don't know, but he reveals in a very amazing way. I mean, it's so anyway. I would say that I just wish I could. I don't know why I can't think of his last name right now.
Is it
But
Carmichael?
yeah,
Yeah.
Gerard Carmichael.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant comedian. I don't know how to explain it. He kind of reminds me of Basquiat, the great artist. I don't know why, but his comedy reminds me of like he's a comic Basquiat. So that's my opinion. But I would say that would be a great show to watch.
Yeah, I love that, and I'm always looking for different things to watch. So I'll have to add that to my watch list because I'm not familiar. So I'll look him up for sure and give him. And you said he's on HBO.
Yeah, it's on HBO, and he has
That's
several
awesome.
stand-ups. There's several HBO specials that are really, really great. He's an amazing communicator, storyteller, comic.
Yeah,
Hands, yeah, I'm
yeah,
really impressed with him.
that's awesome. Well, I just added him to my real good list, so I'll get in there and watch some of his stuff for sure.
Okay,
Yeah, I feel like,
great.
a lot of the time I ask people this question, like, what do you do whenever you're not busy doing all of these other things, right? And most of the time they're throwing stuff out there like, oh, well, I meditate. Oh, well, I do this. And it's refreshing to have someone who's like, I watch shows. That's great because it's like you got to get the relaxation in sometime and you got to get that just absorption of things that aren't necessarily your story and aren't
Right.
necessarily connected to you. You have to have that reprieve a little bit sometimes. So that's
I
great.
think I think so. I really do. I eat very healthy. You know what I mean? But every now and then I want some, barbecue chips.
Yeah. Yeah. Who doesn't?
Frito, Frito,
Who
Coca-Cola.
doesn't? Yeah. Do you have a true crime story that fascinates you?
A true crime story.
Uh,
You mean something I didn't do?
I mean, if you want to share some you did, that's fine too.
Oh God,
It is being recorded on the internet though, so.
I know. Um, Man, I love crime stories. So I mean, not like I have a rush of stuff flowing through my head. Man, that's a hard one. I watch so many crime shows. Uh, there was a show, I guess maybe a decade ago, called The Killing. Um, that show was it started off really, really strong. The first and second season. Um, what was interesting about that show was it really did well in keeping you guessing who the murderer was, and you always believed you knew who it was,
Yeah.
only for it to come up that it wasn't that person. And I mean, it did that for I think about 3 seasons, maybe. But I would say that show made quite an impression on me because at the time it was very original. It actually created 2 stars, of which I can't name them. They're not stars anymore, but it really blossomed their careers for a while. But it's a unique true crime. Well, I guess that wouldn't be considered a true crime story. I think that was fictional. But I have been into
Yeah.
cult stories because I was in a cult.
Whoa, hold on.
Yeah, horrible. I can tell you some stories.
I need them. I need the
Lord,
stories.
Lord. Yeah, I was in a cult, Christian cult.
When
I'm not
you
putting
now,
that.
is this when you were an adult, or were you when you were a child, or
I was a young. I was 19.
okay?
I was in acting school, actually. Am I looking at you in the camera? Am I looking at you?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Okay. Getting out of the habit of doing this. See, now I'm
Yeah,
looking at you real, but I'm trying to look at you here. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, I was involved in a cult. Now, mind you, they're great people that are believers that are out there. So I'm not putting down. I'm just saying
absolutely.
that that's what they. And it was a horrible experience. And it was one of the worst experiences of my life. Now, it wasn't as bad as some of the cults of these documentaries that I've
Yeah,
watched because I'm fascinated with them because it's the same story over and over and over and over and over again, where you have a narcissist that starts off appearing to be great and very communal and charismatic and with this special knowledge and bringing everybody together and inspiring people and uplifting people. And then there's this shift, always this shift. There's always a gathering of people who also are struggling to be accepted and to be affirmed. And the narcissist is able to affirm and accept them and gives them a sense of belonging. And then there's a shift. And whatever that shift may be, it is always a dangerous shift.
yeah,
And now people are sucked into something that they didn't realize was, but they got to keep believing it because they've rejected their family. They've moved to some other state. They're living on some property somewhere. And so they have to accept it. And so now they're just completely, in a sense, stuck. Logically, they're connected to what's going on. And then it normally ends in some kind of a tragic, very, very tragic situation.
yeah,
So I'm always drawn to it because I'm always trying to see if the story is going to play out any different. And how does this keep happening over and over again? So I have to admit, I'm fascinated with cult
yeah.
stories.
Yeah. I mean, it's really incredible. Just and there are so many documentaries right now about different cults and everything. And you're right, it is. It's always the same story. It's always someone found a way to prey on a group that was marginalized or disenfranchised and get them engaged in this new, oh, this belief system or this method is what's going to bring me that fulfillment or anything like that. And yeah,
Yeah,
the story's all the same. It never ends well.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I was in it. I went to very prestigious acting school, SUNY Purchase. For those of you all who might understand what SUNY Purchase is, or um, and because I joined the cult, I quit. I quit school after my
Wow.
yeah. Fortunately, I got back to acting maybe a year or two later. Um, I got out of the cult. I'll never forget it. I was sitting with someone that was in it too. And we were over at his house and we were watching TV. This older guy. And he looked over at me and he said, now my full name is Phil Darius Wallace. At that time I went by my first name. And he looked over and he said, Phil, get out of here.
Wow.
Leave. You're better than this. Get out of here. Leave. Go. And I thought about it and I was like, he's right. And not long after that, I was gone. And then, over time, um, I went through a period of wandering and trying to figure things out. But something hit within me. And, there's some people that act because they want to act. There's some people that act because they have to act. I'm one that has to act. I have to tell stories. So
Yeah.
I found myself back in it because that was the truth in me of who I am. So
Okay, so let's dig into that a little bit. Can you talk about some of the experiences that you had growing up that kind of shaped that perspective on storytelling and communication for you?
when I was a child, the first thing I wanted to be was a clown. I
All right.
have no idea why I wanted to be a clown. I think I wanted to be a clown because everybody loved the clown. at that time. That was before It.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. Yeah.
I was terrified of the clown, right?
Uh-huh.
But there was a time when, as a kid, you love clowns. You know what I mean? And because clowns are loved, they're you empathize with the clown. The clown is always trying to do something and fails.
Yeah.
It's funny. I mean, it reminds you of yourself when you fail, but now you can laugh at it. You know what I mean? And so wanting to be a clown, I think, connected me to TV.
Yeah.
And so I found myself wanting to watch TV. And the more I wanted to watch TV, my father didn't want me to watch so much TV, but which made me want to watch more TV.
Of
Right.
course.
And I think watching TV, of course, seeing those stories, I wanted to be in those stories. And one big story I wanted to be in, my father went to this movie long time ago when movies were just one movie. I shouldn't have said that because now you're probably calculating in your head how old I am. I think that is there way we can erase that. Anyway, went to the movie, saw it, got excited, rushed back, picked me up, took me to see the movie. And when I saw the movie, I came back and I was punching and I was kicking, I was screaming. I had just seen Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon.
Okay.
And so I wanted to be Bruce Lee. I wanted to be the Black Bruce Lee, Bruce Leroy, or what was it? Bruce D. I wanted to be Bruce D.
Bruce
Okay.
D. I like that.
I got D, by the way, in this film. It has some martial arts in it. So that I mentioned earlier. But so that got me on a track of really digging into the idea of being an actor because he was an actor. And then I was exposed to Sidney Poitier. And back in my time growing up, and especially his time, there weren't a lot of African American people on screen in the mainstream. Sidney Poitier was one that stood out, class. And so now I wanted to be, like Sidney Poitier. And then it started to spread into James Earl Jones, but then it diversified, right? There was some diversity and inclusion in my imagination where suddenly it became De Niro, Robert De Niro, for those of you all don't know, because once again, to my age, the young people may not even know who Robert De Niro is. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
come on. Surely everyone still knows Robert De Niro. I can't be that. I can't
No.
be. Oh, come on.
Yeah. So, but Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Marlon Brando, because they were brilliant actors, and Meryl Streep, and nowadays is Viola Davis, and Denzel Washington, and but my point is that the admiration for all these film and television actors and seeing great one-person show solo performers, Sarah Jones is one of them, and I can go on and on and on, that I fell in love with being the performer in the story. I still really
Yeah.
wasn't a storyteller per se because I was just approaching it for being one of the parts, one of the pieces of the story. So I think at a young age, that kind of prepped me for, and storytelling was the answer to a lot of things. It got me out of the gang. It also got me reading. I had trouble reading when I was a kid. I think that there was something there that I needed. In today's time, I would have needed services, I'm sure. But at that time, we didn't know anything about that,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So I struggled throughout school. I struggled. And my father would leave books on my desk, hoping when I woke up I would begin to read. One of them was on Bruce Lee, but he also would leave books on Frederick Douglass, who I now perform, Malcolm X, who I have performed, Martin Luther King, who I have performed, right? Muhammad Ali, just anyone that can inspire me as a child. But nevertheless, I still struggled, and I leaned into creativity because that's where I excelled. That's where I found my esteem was through creativity. Uh, and then at about 18 years old, my dramatic structure teacher pulled me in to the office, and he says, "Phil." Once again, my full name is Phil
Yeah.
Darius Wallace. I go by Darius. Now, Phil, if you want to act, you're going to have to learn how to read. Start with this. And it was Tennessee Williams, The Kindness of Strangers,
Yeah.
which is his life story. And I struggled through that book. I mean, I struggled through that book, but I read it. And it was the beginning of a journey of reading many, 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 many books. And I think that eventually, as I accidentally became a speaking coach, helping people that need to communicate, whether they're CEOs or people that just want to do speeches, or, you know, whatever, the influencers, the list goes on and on. I coached them, but it was an accident how I started doing it. I'll tell you that story. But when I started to coach them and I started to introduce them to my world of theater, I began to experience the power in storytelling because I saw transformation in their communication and in their presentations. And so I dove deeper in just in the art of storytelling itself. And that became a rabbit hole journey that's opened up this magical world of telling stories. What really unlocked it was when I wrote a bad screenplay treatment. Horrible. I thought it was great, actually. I thought it was great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you wouldn't have written it if you didn't think it was great, right?
Fantastic. Maybe it was fantastic, but there's a director here. I don't know if you know the name Craig Brewer, but he directed the movie called Hustle and Flow. He also directed the remake of Flashdance. He did a remake of Coming to America. That was him. And Dolomite Is My Name. So he's a friend of mine. So I gave him my little treatment, thinking he's going to love it. This is going to be great. We'll have a great discussion.
Uh-huh.
Yep. Darius, let's have coffee. Like, oh, wow, cool. Yeah, we're going to have coffee. Yeah. Yeah. So we get together, and he was like, Darius, I'm going to help you out. That help you out turned into a 3-hour masterclass in storytelling.
Oh, wow. That, like, one-on-one? That's amazing.
That probably someone would pay 25 grand for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was eye-opening. I mean, eye-opening in amazing different ways. And I was thinking, this could work for storytelling in general and public speaking in general. And so I studied it and I included it. And to this day, I'm constantly searching and finding for other methods of telling story because it is a rich, very rich art, and it benefits you, has the same effects on you as practicing yoga.
Okay.
That's a fact.
Interesting.
You can look it up.
Yeah.
It lowers your blood pressure, causes better blood flow, breath flow, eases anxiety and depression. It massages your muscles your organs from the inside out, so that it causes weight loss. Because it burns from the inside out, like yoga does. Probably because you're using your whole body, like what I'm doing now when you're telling stories. You really everything is invested. So, you know, to answer a very long answer.
That's okay. Yeah, I mean that's really neat. I love that you tied it into, like, it helped you do all of these things. Sounds very foundational for you, and something with that big of an impact kind of has no choice but to continue into adulthood, right? If you're tying all of this into it kept me off the streets, it helped me learn how to read, which, by the way, like, very similar story with my two younger sisters. My baby sister was struggling to learn how to read, and my middle sister didn't necessarily like to read, and they got into a series of books, and they would take turns. My middle sister would read a chapter to my baby sister, and my baby sister would read a chapter to my middle sister. And that really got them into stories, and the story was so good that it got them into, okay, now I like to read. Okay, now I'm connecting this in. And we're all big readers, so now it's not a big deal. But it's amazing how, looking back, sometimes those little things just pile up, and they become a part of this bigger piece of you. And it's really neat to hear you just talk about that.
Yeah, I'm very, very thankful. Even, you know, I don't know if you saw any of my TED Talks, but I also, at one period of my life, was homeless. during that period of time was a short period of time. But words themselves are very, very powerful. And during that period of time, I remember something my father would say: all things lost can be regained. And we, like the divine, can say be, and it is, which is actually Islamic. My father is a Muslim, but it's universal.
Yeah.
We power this, letters or symbols. And when you combine the symbols together, they are an expression of our ideas, our imagination. And imagination is how the universe works. Or one of the ways the universe works. Not the only way, but it is the way things are manifested, through the imagination.
Absolutely. If you can't imagine
Yeah.
it, it's not going to be.
Yep, that's right. That's right. Yeah. And your imagination is the same faculty as your memory. And sometimes we get stuck with the memory looking back. We're constantly looking back, right? And so we repeat because we're constantly looking back. So we repeat the past because we're constantly looking back. We're trying to fix it. We're always going back. But we can use that same faculty as the imagination forward, where we can see our future and we can remember our future.
Yeah.
And so repeating that.
That's really neat. I mean, so I know that's kind of, you're talking about this form of like manifesting things in the future. And I don't think I've heard anyone put it quite that way. Like you imagine your past all the time. That's why you repeat. Now you can imagine your future, and then the future is what will repeat if you're manifesting it that way. I think that's a really neat perspective.
Yeah, it's true, because storytelling is the story structure is the structure of life. What do I mean by that? Well, there's a story about a young man in the 60s who wrote a screenplay that was very, very bad. None of the studios wanted to make the movie. He was very depressed, but he ran across a book called Hero with a Thousand Faces. Have you heard of it?
I have not.
Have you heard of Joseph Campbell? Have you heard of The Hero's Journey?
Maybe.
Okay, no problem. Some people have and some people haven't. But
Yeah.
the thing is, he ran across this book. And in it, he discovered this concept called the hero's journey, which is in every folklore and every movie, myth, religion, and it's thousands and thousands of years old. As a matter of fact, it's in nature, so it's forever, it's eternal. So he finds this concept. He wants to study it. He goes to the University of Southern California, audits the class. He comes back to his screenplay, rewrites it, and the studios love it. They love it so much they turned it into a movie
Nice.
in 1978. And that movie has had many, many sequels. And it is now a multi-billion-dollar franchise. And it's called Star Wars.
Yeah.
And the young man was George Lucas.
Nice.
What I've come to find too, though, is that the hero's journey is the masculine hero's journey, the warrior. But there's also a feminine hero's journey, which is the masculine hero's journey is divide and conquer. The woman's hero's journey is combine to grow. And sometimes you'll have them interchanging. So like the story of Jesus really was the feminine journey of uniting, bringing about a sense of peace and letting the utopian world grow from that, right? Whereas the story of David is the masculine version of that, where war has to happen in order to. So in a lot of movies you are, especially past up till now, have been the more of the hero's journey that's masculine. So Star Wars is that, right? But the Wizard of Oz is the female idea of the hero's journey. But really, it's the cycle of life. It's in nature. Both are running in nature all the time. And so what we discovered then is that the story structure is a structure of life, and it's happening all the time. You know what I mean? Happening all the time.
Yeah. I like
Yeah.
that.
I was trying to call. Uh, my. Hey, Ann. Sorry, everybody. My daughter's
It's all
trying to call me.
good.
Hey, Jay. Hey, and Violet's trying to call. Can you let her know that I'll bring the stuff? Got to take care of the little ones. And tell
Oh, I
mommy
get
that
it.
Violet are back. Oh, Violet. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, everybody. I'm a dad too.
Listen, my child is right out. I was just giving him the evil eye because he's right out here doing stuff out here, and I specifically told him, like, I'm putting you in bed. Don't come over here while I'm doing this. And
Yes,
where is he?
right.
Right out there doing that. So I get it. You're good. You're good. All good.
But what's beautiful about that, though, is that, you know, this cycle, this circle is happening with us all the time. There was a time when you weren't doing the podcast.
Yep.
And you were just in your ordinary world, the mundane world, the same old, over and over and over again. And then there's an interruption. There's a call.
Yep.
Something calling you to this world of podcasting that you know nothing of. And then there's the decision. Should I or shouldn't I?
Yeah.
I'm going to go for it. Well, Mama, I don't know. I don't know if you should do it. You don't know much about it.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you don't want to do it, it's like, this is what your passion is. This is what you've been looking for. You got to do it. It's rocking back and forth. Then finally, something happens that catapults you into doing it. Now you're in a world that's so different than what you're used to.
Mm-hmm.
And now you need someone to guide you or give you some advice. You need your mentor, whoever that is. It could be another podcast or YouTube. And it's a roller coaster ride of ups and downs. And then there's a moment where it gets real. And the story changes. And it ain't a roller coaster ride no more.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, it's getting kind of shaky. And now you're moving up against something that's challenging. And that challenge is coming at you. And you've got to figure something out. And then there's a moment where you can't figure it out and all is lost. It's all is lost moment. And then there's a dark night of the soul where you're wondering, why in the world did I decide to do podcasting? Mm-hmm. But then, and there's always a but then, you remember something you learned or something that you remember from way back that your mother, your dad, or your friend, or whoever, or your cat taught you that is going to give you the strength to press forward. And so
Mm-hmm.
you do, and whatever that challenge was, it doesn't look so big now. The dragon is not as big as what you thought. The Goliath is not as big as what you thought. Nobody else can see that you can overcome, but you can. And so they follow you, and so you do. And you take whatever knowledge or wisdom you've gotten from this journey, from your extraordinary world, and you bring it back to your ordinary world to make it extraordinary. That's the hero's journey.
I mean, listen, everything I know you don't, I'm sure, well, I guess I don't know. I'm sure you don't know what my journey with podcasting has specifically been, but it's what you just said.
Yeah. It's in us. So we're drawn to these stories, because we're made of it.
Yeah.
And the universe itself literally is playing out this cycle over and over and over again, all throughout nature, all throughout the sun, moon, and stars. Birth, life, and death is happening over and over and over again. So we're drawn to it. And so as storytellers, speakers, professionals, actors, it's worth it for us to work on it. Because one, we work on ourselves in the process, but two, we bring medicine of the soul to people.
Mm-hmm.
So
I like that. And we've got a great question in the chat that I want to make sure that we get to. And it kind of ties in with what I was going to ask next, which is about storytelling in general. But Tib asks, what are some methods to hook when trying to tell a persuasive story, like trying to teach a lesson with a story? There's a point at the end, so hold up and listen. Like how you get them to continue listening to get to the end of the story. And Tib, thank you for that question. Conflict.
Thank you, Tim.
Yep.
Conflict. So, Tim, 5 P's. Purpose, person, place, problem, payoff. Right? Tim, let me tell you a story. There was a young man 30 years ago who lost his will to live. And he carried pills in his pocket for the day in which he would do it.
Mm.
And one day he was on a subway train, and across the way was another man. And this man, oddly enough, was sitting in lotus position. He was like a yogi. And the young man had always wanted to learn yoga. So he said, are you a yogi? And the yogi said, I am. The young man says, do you teach yoga? And the yogi said, I do. And the man said, will you teach me? And the yogi said, I will. And the young man said, how much? And the yogi said, nothing. So the young man ritualistically went to the yogi's home, but the yogi noticed every time the young man came, he was very, very sad. So he sat the young man down and he told the young man of a time 30 years prior when he was young, the yogi, and he lost his will to live. And he carried pills in his pocket for the day in which he would do it. And he did it. He took the pills and died. And as he was hovering above his body, he saw his family members coming in broken because of what he had done to himself. He was so young at the time, and he wanted so bad to have a second chance at life. And he hoped that he could live again. And he found himself back in his body, alive. And he said from that moment on, he would dedicate his life to making other people happy, and he chose to use yoga to do it. Well, when the young man heard that story, he slowly took the pills out of his pocket. And the yogi said, so this is the reason why I told that story. He says, you have a choice to make. You can leave those pills on the altar of Ganesh, or you can take those pills with you and do as you will. And the young man, in a moment of mindfulness and inspiration, made his decision to take those pills and leave it on the altar. And the young man continued to go on, start a career and start a family. And the young man is sitting before you today. So, purpose. What's the purpose of the story? That you're not alone, and that suicide is not the answer. That there is a whole other world, a whole other life for you. That's the purpose. Person, who are the characters involved? There's the two, the young man and the yogi. Place, where is all this taking place? It's taking place on the subway train and also in the yogi's home, which is really important because it creates the atmosphere. But the most important is problem. This young man has it in his mind to take his life. And the yogi, when he finds out something's wrong, what's going to happen between the two of them? And then the payoff. The payoff is the discovery that the young man didn't take his life. And as a matter of fact, the young man is talking before you right now and has lived a whole few decades that would have been lost had he taken his life. So, Tim, purpose, person, place, problem, payoff. Those 5 principles can help you engage. You connect the purpose to the payoff, and you always have the problem within there. You don't forget about the characters and also the atmosphere of the place where it's happening.
I like that because you're making sure to kind of give all of the information, and you are keeping that engagement. You are giving them that hook of that problem up front, and then how do you get to that ultimate resolution? Whether that's a happy ending or sometimes not so happy of an ending, but you're giving them the piece of the story, the pieces of the story. It's just holding someone's hand and taking them through the story, because you can get really lost in the details of a story sometimes. I just finished a series of books where I was like, boy, you need to get to the point.
Right. Yeah.
And so if you're taking them through something and you're holding that reader's hand or that audience's hand to really say, here's where we're going. I'm going to lead you over there. And here's all the places we're going to stop on the way. But I like that. The 5 Ps. That's excellent.
Yeah.
Now you just talked about, kind of those suicidal ideations, and it sounds like a little bit of depression. So how can storytelling, I mean, obviously those kinds of conflicts in someone's life could create a story to tell later, but how could storytelling help someone who is dealing with anxiety or depression or other challenges, how can telling that story help them cope and overcome what they're facing?
Sure. Well, my own personal experience with it, when it was revealed to me, even before I researched it and did a TEDx talk on it, um, I was going through a really dark period, and I was heavily involved with Tennessee Shakespeare, and the artistic director um, called me up and says, "Hey, I want you to do Mark Antony and Julius Caesar. It'll be good for you." And I was like, "Oh man, I am at this stage of my life. I don't think I can do it." It was just one of those things where it was just, it's a complex character, and there's this 4-page monologue that he has, and I was just like, psychologically, I don't think I can do it. And but to make a long story short, I made a decision to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But what ended up happening was every morning when I got up and I started to work on it, I started to feel a release of the anxiety and depression that I was feeling. And the more I worked on it, the more I felt a release. And eventually the depression completely went away, and did the performance. And then I realized that even though my artistic director was saying it would be good for you to do this, he was saying it would be good for me as an actor.
Mm-hmm.
But what he didn't know was that, no, it's going to be good for me as a human being.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why is because it takes your mind off of yourself. Sometimes with anxiety and depression, it comes about because we become very, very focused on ourselves. So focused that we become our worst critic. We become our own enemy in a lot of ways. And we begin to tell ourselves stories that really don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
We begin telling ourselves stories that other people are thinking. We become mind readers that they're not thinking at all. It's a story that we're constantly telling ourselves over and over and over and over again. And we create this huge world, fictional world, but it's real to us. And we live in it. And what storytelling does is it takes you out of your world into another imaginary world. And when you have a point, a person, or an audience, now your goal is to move them. And it becomes about them. And because of that, there's this release that's happening. And you may say something that may inspire them. And so now there's this interaction that's happening that's creating a sense of healing, because they're receiving something from you that could be entertaining, inspiring, or take them off of their sorrows. But also, too, you're taking your mind off of your own sorrows. And so I believe somewhere in the midst of that is where storytelling can help with anxiety and depression.
I guess I've never really connected that before, but it's kind of one of those things about it's a little bit of a distraction. It's a little bit of a cope, right? Because you're putting yourself into a different story for a moment. But it's very similar to reading and gaming to me. The way that you were just describing that, it's very similar to you go read a book and you're taking yourself out of your mind. You play a game, you're giving yourself that distraction a little bit. And then things like interacting with other people, going out and socializing and those kinds of things. If that's something that recharges you, it's just getting you out of your own head for a little bit. And so if you can kind of tell those stories or tell a story or, in whatever way you want to do that, I definitely could see that helping for sure.
Yeah, and then within stories, a lot of great stories, there's a lot of metaphors and a lot of hidden
Yeah.
meanings speaking to your subconscious that also the story itself is healing. The story that you're telling is healing, or there's something in your life that you're needing to get out, you're needing to communicate, and suddenly you do. I remember there was another moment in my life where I was, dealing with something, and I was sitting in a meeting, and someone saw it in my face. And so they came over to me after the meeting and said, "Look, I can see in your face something's wrong." And he told me this beautiful, very inspirational story. And when he finished telling me, he said, "I want you to know I'm going through something too." And this is a story that's helped me. As a matter of fact, it's helping me as I'm telling you the story. So yes, there's something very inspirational, powerful, and beautiful about telling stories, but then also listening
Mm-hmm.
to stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, just the nature of what we do here generally week after week, we listen to stories and we hear these things that people have faced and the ways that they've overcome them. And that's a little bit of healing for someone who's experiencing something similar, but it's also a little bit of healing for the person who's sharing that story also. And
Yeah.
especially if you're driven by that need to help others and to really kind of put out there that there is light and there is hope, telling that story can be super, super helpful and really
Yeah,
healing.
absolutely.
Now, do you think that there are some people who wouldn't benefit from storytelling? Do you think there are some people who would be more on the listening side would be helpful versus telling a story? Or, does that have to do with like public speaking anxiety is one of the ones that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, there. I deal with that when I'm working with
Mm-hmm.
with clients in particular. I think first to discover for yourself that it's okay being an introvert. I'm an introvert.
You would not think
I'm in,
that.
yeah. It's been the coaching and the speaking, a lot of the techniques that I teach, I practice, which makes it seem like I'm an extrovert, but I'm really naturally an introvert. So first to become okay with being an introvert, and really the most powerful word in communication is listening. So there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being receptive to it. Um, but I will say that we as human beings are not made to just receive.
Mm-hmm.
We're also made to give. Because even though you're shy, even though you may not feel comfortable around people, all of that, believe you me, I can relate to. I know, even though I'm an actor and storyteller. But it was a time in my life when, for sure, even as an actor, I'd rather not see anybody after the show. Just let me get to my car, get home, and be finished for the night. But even though you may be feeling that, there is no other person on the planet like you. And there's no other person on the planet that has lived your story but you. And that there's something within who you are in your life experience that someone else needs.
Mm-hmm.
And that what you have to share is of value. And so I think because of that, I would say that it's beneficial to be willing. You may not be in a space to do it yet, but to be willing to share. Not to feel pressured to share, and not to criticize yourself because you're more of a listener, but to also realize that you're also a teller. You really are. And so to give yourself that freedom, that permission, and I offer to you to give yourself permission to share. And so in that sense is my belief that yes, I think everybody should tell a story or tell
Mm-hmm.
stories to the people at least that they care about and love.
I really do also I feel like you and I could just be friends because I really do believe like we are when you give, when you're not just taking from other people. Listen, I've dated some people that this might not be true for, but when you're also giving and you're not just taking from other people, you get that feeling of like fulfillment a little bit, and it gives you hope that there's someone else out there doing the same for other people for what you're doing. So I fully believe that we as humans are meant to give back, whether that is something small just within your family unit or with your kids or at work or whatever, or on a larger scale. I think that there is something to, you got to give back in some way, shape, or form, no matter what that looks like. And it can look different for every person.
Yeah. There's something magical. As a matter of fact, this book called The Magic that's dealing with gratitude. And so there's something, a connection between giving and Thanksgiving. You know what I mean? Giving and Thanksgiving, there's a connection there, and it opens up, it releases something, it seems like, in the universe that it enables us to have more fulfillment because we're emptying ourselves of ourselves and then being filled up with the next, energy of, inspiration or what have you. I think
Yeah.
when we try to attain, um, you know, as you say, I practice Tai Chi and Qigong, right? Well, the old Kung Fu masters, because Qi really is a force, and you can build up that force, and they practice building up this force because they practice fighting. They were combative, right? So they would build up all this energy and they would hold it because they knew if they held it, it would be there for them whenever they had to fight. But what was noticed is they were all dying young,
Mm.
and some were dying of cancer. And what was thought was is that when you build up all this energy, this chi, right? Emotion is a part of that. When you build up all of this emotion that's not moving, imagine that emotion not moving, energy, emotion is not moving.
Mm-hmm.
The vibration of it slows down and it hardens and it becomes something,
Yeah.
a dis-ease,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we're not made to hold like that. So in Tai Chi and in Qigong, we build it and we release it. Get that anger. If you're angry, get it, get it, get it, get it. But then you got to let it go.
Yeah.
Sad, go on and get it. Go on and feel that sadness. Feel it, then let it go. Same thing with joy, though. You get happy, something happens, really celebrate, but then let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're not made to hold on to it.
Yeah. Now, do you think that Tai Chi and Qigong, do you think that those impact or complement your work in storytelling and acting, or are they just something you kind of
Oh,
practice on the side a little bit for that release and everything?
oh no, it connects. It all connects. For
Mm-hmm.
me, to Tai Chi yoga, it's really holistic.
Yeah.
85% of our communication is nonverbal. Nonverbal. So that means your body and your emotions and your expressions is what's mostly involved. The words is just a little bit. And so you got to take care of the whole being as a storyteller, because you're utilizing your whole being to express yourself.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, not to get religious, but when you take the Hebrew letters of Yahweh, and it goes from what is it, right to left or what have you? Because we go left to right, it goes right to left, and it's horizontal. When you make it vertical, it looks like a human being.
Oh, wow.
When you take the name Allah, which is Muslim Arabic, it's arm, leg, arm, head, human being.
Mm-hmm.
So what am I saying there? That it's when we communicate, we're expressing with our whole being, not just our words, but even our actions are our words too.
Mm-hmm.
So we then want to take care of the whole person. So a lot of times, I encourage my speakers and people that I work with is that the first thing you want to take a look at is, one of the first things we get into is ethos. Not to get all educational here, but it means ethics, that you are about what you're talking about, that you have experience and expertise in it. Also, that you resonate with what you're saying. You're not just
Mm-hmm.
saying things you think people want to hear. But most importantly, it's intrapersonal communication, is how you communicate to yourself. It's the stories you tell yourself about yourself, right? And if you're telling yourself negative stories about yourself, that's what's going to show up. But it goes deeper than that. It's also how you take care of yourself.
Mm.
How are you eating? How are you sleeping? How are you drinking? Who are your relationships with? How are you inspiring yourself on a regular basis? All of this is included with who you are as a human being. And therefore, all of it is included with who you are as a presenter, a communicator, or a storyteller.
Yeah. It all just feeds on itself.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
What are some specific ways that folks can harness the power of storytelling to either improve their communication skills in a personal context or a professional context?
Well, I would say personal context, what you want to do is have what's called a story bank. And so you want to take a look at the things that you have happened in your life that you enjoy sharing and share it more, whatever you feel comfortable with. When you're in conversation and you're out or you're talking with people and you see that there's a story that people like or impacts people's lives, right? Tell that story more, but then find other stories. Begin to collect things that are happening in your life or that you're seeing happening in other people's lives. Um, get invested in reading more stories and watching more stories and taking a deeper look at stories that could be examples. So I think on a personal level, create what's called a story bank. On a professional level, you should just know that no one makes decisions logically, that you can make all the sense in the world and people will just say, mm-hmm, and they won't do anything. Because nobody makes a decision based on logic. We make decisions based on emotions. And the best way that you can reach people, by salespeople, people that have to pitch all the time, or people that have to work with teams and so forth, is that you have to reach them emotionally. And the best way to reach them emotionally is through storytelling, because when you tell me a story, images come up in my mind. I relate it to personal in my life. I have an emotional reaction to it. Now I'm connected to you emotionally. And you can make me feel a certain way about the information you want to give me. But if I don't feel anything about it, it's just good information.
Yeah.
So I would say for the professionals, understand that it's very important to tell stories. Therefore, it's important to learn how to tell stories. What's natural is that we listen to stories. What's unnatural is that we stand up in front of a crowd of people to tell them stories. That comes through technique and training. On a personal level, pay attention to the stories that you tell that people like and tell it more often, because it'll help develop confidence in you as a storyteller.
Yeah. I like this comment in the chat. I mean, first of all, Tibbs says I need a story or a picture, and I absolutely agree. Like, but that's what the storytelling brings to you, is that picture in your head. And then what's
Yes.
good, I really like this comment. It says I usually pretend I'm somebody else when I try to reach people, because that's putting yourself in someone else's shoes and saying, like, I am considering another perspective and I am making sure to put this in. And I'm gonna have to go back to work tomorrow and really look at a presentation that I've been working on and try to weave in some emotion into it. Because I am very much like a, let's get the logic on the paper. So I'll have to use this tomorrow. I'll let you know how it goes.
Most people in the corporate world are, but you want to find, there's a variety of different stories. There's ample stories, there's personal stories, there's stories of other people. There's, I still think metaphor is of a story. Typology is a type of um myth is a type of a story. Allegory is my favorite type of storytelling. But my point though is that you want to find stories to connect people emotionally to what you're talking about. Because once again, if it's just information, it's good information, which nobody remember.
Yeah.
But they will remember your story.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. As a TEDx Memphis coach for 7 years now, right? What are
Yes,
some key things you focus on to help speakers whenever they're trying to effectively communicate their stories?
Well, beautiful. Well, TEDx is a style, right? So the first thing that I try to encourage those speakers is TEDx is you speaking to one person and it's someone you really, really care about. It just so happens to be the audience, and therefore the world of everyone who sees it. And TEDx is a conversation. So it literally is, you're communicating as if you're communicating to just one person. That's the first thing. The second thing is TEDx is a revelation. And so you want to first understand the point or the value you want to leave with the audience first, and then backtrack to how you're going to get there. What are those points and the stories surrounding those points to get to the value or the point that the audience is going to walk away with? And how does the beginning, your intro, in order to appreciate the value, you have to have some place to come from, which is a time when you didn't have that value. And you build your presentation from there. But then one of the key things is you want to take what people see typically in normal situations and flip it on its head, so that now they see it in a completely different way, but then it's revealing, life-changing, transformative is the sauce of the TED Talk. And so when we work, we try to discover in the content, what are you saying and how can you take what's typical and flip it on its head so that it's revealing? And that revelation is the point or the value that you want that audience to walk away with. It's the transformation that you want them to have. And so we work on our talks. I was to TEDx for maybe it's 8 years now. But now I've since moved on from doing TEDx Memphis, but I was the TEDx coach for 8 years. Nice. And I've worked seeing over 100 go on to the stage to do TEDx talks.
That's really neat. I mean, it's got to be just such a broad range of topics too that you got to work with.
Yeah, amazing topics.
Yeah,
amazing
that's great.
topics.
Were there any common challenges that you found yourself just kind of either not correcting people on, but helping people with whenever they were working on those?
Yeah, the main thing was the self-worth part, self-confidence, low self-esteem. No matter how experienced the speakers are or were, or inexperienced, it didn't matter. It all came back to rediscovering confidence within your self-worth, self-esteem, believing in yourself. We always come back to that and build from there, because no matter what, where we always found ourselves, there was always can't, not, words like that, knows, you know what I mean? So all I would do is remove it from the sentence, I don't think people will really get into that. I said, that's great. Let's rewrite the sentence, take don't out.
Yeah.
I think people will get into that. Yes, say it again. I think people will get into that. Well, what happens is when you take those negative words out, suddenly now you see possibilities. So that even if the topic isn't, or the content isn't where you want it to be, at least now you've accepted what may be possibly working, and now you can, there's possibilities to create more. But when you get into don't, can't, and all those things, you shut it down, you shut it down, you shut it down, you shut it down, and now you just freeze. And I've seen that too. So I work people out of it by changing the story that they tell themselves. And so that's what I normally have to do.
Yeah, I like that. What's Good has another comment. They said, I find it harder to tell a story with a group of 5 to 10 people. One person or a larger group, it gets easier. Do you ever work with people to say, like, fine tune it for a different group size, or if you've got a person who's like terrified of large groups or medium-sized groups, what advice do you have for them?
I would say 2 things. One, you do want to understand that the room is different. You always want to make it relevant to the room. So if it's 3 people, 5 people, that's a different room than when it's a large space. Sometimes it is easier to speak to a larger group because, in a sense, you can feel like you're not seeing as much. You know what I mean? Whereas small group, you can feel their presence and all eyes are on you. But what you always want to stay in touch with is once you're on the stage or on the platform, it's no longer about you. You want to make it about those 5 people, that there's something within your presentation that's going to help those people out, the smaller group. And that understanding that is the first thing. And it's the same thing in a larger group. But the second thing is you want to anchor yourself in techniques that can help hold you in the space so that you're not just going off the fly, or you're not just working with material that you haven't quite prepared. And even if you have prepared, that's still not rooted in a journey. A talk or a presentation is a journey from beginning, middle, and end. So techniques are what can help guide you, so that whether you're speaking to one person or you're speaking to 1,000 people, you're anchored in the techniques in such a way that that's what's holding you, that's what's bracing you. And a lot of times when people are afraid or there's anxiety in public speaking, it's because, the techniques are not there, because it seems natural. You get up and you talk. But when you get people to get in front of people, it's like saying, hey, we're going to go to Iowa and I want you to fly the plane. Just go with the flow.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you understand how to fly, it doesn't mean that you won't be nervous, but at least you can anchor yourself in the skill set to be able to fly that plane. Well, public speaking is the same way. Guess what? Because people, the biggest fear in America anyway, is the fear of public speaking, even over death.
Oh,
That
wow.
means, even over death. That means you'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy.
I did not realize that was the biggest fear in America. I mean, I guess I understand, because getting up and speaking in front of a lot of people, I know, can be really daunting. And it's like, well, if you're dead, you don't have to worry about anything anymore. So.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But I encourage when we as professionals we literally, part of how we're making income is with our mouths and our ideas. And so it's important in understanding that to learn better ways to communicate, which is through learning methods of storytelling, but then also to learning methods of rhetoric, which can help you communicate better. And over time, you just get better and better and better at it. And that's what makes the difference.
Yeah. So what motivated you to start sharing this part of your story publicly? And what do you hope the messages that you're conveying to other people whenever you come on things like podcasts and speak?
I've been through a lot. I mean, I've been through a lot. And I think I've just come to understand that a lot of people are going through a lot. And, I'll go through a lot again and again and again. I like to tell my own personal stories, because when I've heard stories of people's, trials and tribulations and how they've overcome them, and their wins and what that meant to them, it spoke to me in such a way where it helped me understand I'm not alone. And so I enjoy helping other people realize they're not alone. I post a lot on Facebook and, things that I'm doing, yada, 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 yada. And so sometimes when I'm out, people will come up to me and they'll just say, congratulations. Because they think that what they see on Facebook is it. And so I love sharing my stories to let them know, behind all the things we share on Facebook, there's this other life that I have and have had, of a tremendous amount of struggle.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of just letting people know you're not alone in this, and so I'm hoping somewhere in the mix of that, people, are inspired, as I've been inspired by other people sharing their stories.
Absolutely. There's another question in the chat. What's Good says, have you ever dealt with someone where the anxiety is just too much and they can't control their emotions?
Yes, I have. He was a young man during the pandemic. His mother I worked with, who was also an introvert. She's in commercial real estate. She had me coach her. She had gotten a leadership position. And so during the pandemic, she called me up. She has a 28-year-old son, and he just lost his job. He works in the tech world. He really wanted to get a great job, and he climbed all these interviews, and she was worried that he was just going to be disappointed. Nobody was going to hire him. So she hired me to work with him. And I was like, yeah, that's what I do. I'm good. Let's get it. So we go down to the office that I used to have in Memphis, and he comes in, and he's I don't know, 5'2", red hair, and 28 years old. But when he sat down, he kind of sat down like a 7-year-old, and chest was collapsed, very quiet, very good guy. And I was thinking, not a problem. It's going to be all good. I can fix this. 2 hours later, after working on 2 sentences, I was like, I don't know. But then I told myself a different story. And we got into a conversation, and I found out some other things about him through listening to him. And I discovered how he worked and how he learned. And so to make a long story short, I tapped into him and how he learned. And I started to see subtle growth. And it just kept going. I learned that he learns through repetition. I learned that he's a memorizer. Some of my students are improvisers. Some of my students are outliners. They can get the bullet points and go off the top of the bullet points. Some of my students have to memorize.
Yeah.
He's one of them. I discovered that through repetition and memorization. Then we can get the techniques in, because now he has the words. He doesn't have to pull it from the air. It's in him now. And so through the course of time, I noticed that he sat down a little differently. His chest was out a little differently. And he started to get these interviews, and he started to get callbacks. And then he got hired at the very place where he wanted to work. And after he got hired, he was still getting callbacks. And he got hired at another place. A year later, his mother calls me and says, he's moved into leadership. A year after that, she sends me this text. He's won an award. And I give him a call. At the time when I first met him, he was living with his mom. He's bought a house. And so that was a time when the anxiety was overwhelming. The introvertedness was amazing. The lack of confidence was phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
But we found a way. In particular, he found a way.
Yeah. And it's just kind of tapping into whatever works for that individual, right?
Yeah, whatever works for the individual. We all learn differently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think if that's something that you're facing and you're really struggling with it, and you're in a place where you need to get into a spot where you're more comfortable speaking, working with someone like a professional coach is where that's going to get that help for you. Because I don't know that there's a magic bullet of, if you're struggling with public speaking, if you're struggling with this, if you're experiencing this anxiety that's too big around public speaking, I don't know that there's one thing that someone could tell you. I think you really got to work with someone one-on-one.
I think so. I mean, I would love to work with your audience, but even if it's not me, finding someone or something or some place that can help you communicate better, it'll open up doors for you.
Yeah.
I understand what it feels like to be an introvert. At 13 years old, I almost flunked my first acting class at 13, because every time I stood up in front of people, I would always forget my lines. And so someone saw something in me, and my high school theater teacher, and pulled it out of me. But even then, I would hide, as actors shouldn't do, but I used to do it, hide behind the characters, hide behind the costumes, hide behind the staging and the words. And when I finished, then I would just want to get past everyone and I didn't want to engage.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go to the cast party. I just want to go home. Right.
Yeah.
But, I got into coaching and speaking by accident. And that led me into this world of discovery of the power that's there. I was sitting in a Starbucks. I was unemployed, and that was my ritual. Go to Starbucks, get a muffin and a coffee. I was sitting with my muffin and a coffee. Didn't want to be bothered. My books, so I can get that inspiration going. And in walks Burt Reynolds. Do you know who Burt Reynolds is?
Yeah.
Yeah, Burt Reynolds walks in. He was a star for the young people back in the 80s and 90s. Burt Reynolds walks in and he sees me. Now, it wasn't really Burt Reynolds. It was someone who looked like Burt Reynolds.
Mm-hmm.
But Burt Reynolds sees me and I see him and I'm like, oh no, here we go. I know he's going to come over to me. And I really don't want him to come over to me. Please don't come over to me. And so I'm reading, I'm just watching this Burt Reynolds slowly get closer and closer. I'm like, oh. And he stops and he looks at me and he sees what I'm reading. It's the Bible. And he says, do you believe that? And I was like, oh man, I'm reading it, man. Yeah, I believe it. I just say, yeah, I do. And he says, can I sit down? I was thinking, oh, no, you can't sit down, man. I'm trying to eat my muffin and I'm an unemployed actor. I just want to inspire myself. Please, no. But I said, sure, you can have a seat. So he sits down and we get into a discussion. But then he asked the magic question. So what is it you do? Why was that magical? Even though I was an introvert, as an actor, I got to have my elevator pitch. I have to in order to survive an actor. I had mastered that. So I told it to him. And he says, I wonder, would you be willing? What I didn't know is I wasn't sitting by Burt Reynolds. I was sitting by one of the most powerful men in Memphis. You might as well say I was sitting next to the mayor. They called this guy, Larry Jensen, the Kingmaker.
Oh, wow.
That's who I was. And he ran a commercial real estate company. I wonder if you would be willing to help my brokers give better presentations. I was an unemployed actor, and so my response was, you paying?
Yeah.
But of course I am. And so he hired me. Didn't know what I was doing, but I did know acting. So I taught them acting.
Mm-hmm.
And so he really enjoyed it. And he took me around to other companies. Well, through the course of time, that grew into me coaching organically, groups and so on and so forth. Well, over time, his son started a foundation that sponsored TEDx Memphis. And so I started coaching for TEDx Memphis. I did 2 TEDx talks, and I've worked with over 100 people, of studio executives and, CEOs and hospitals and influencers and entrepreneurs, and the list goes on and on. All because of that one question. So what is it you do? And my willingness to come out of myself
Mm-hmm.
and engage and share with someone else. So.
Yeah. That's really neat. Just that chance encounter at a Starbucks.
Yeah.
Like, what if you hadn't gone to Starbucks that day?
That's right.
It was clearly meant to be.
Yeah. It opened up a lot of doors.
Yeah.
But professionally and just in general, public speaking will open up doors for you. And it seems to monetize itself. And I believe it does because words are creative.
Mm.
They're creative. And so they have life in them. And so they grow. That's why you got to be careful how you use words, because it grows.
Yeah. Here's another question. It says, have you ever had to refer or recommend psychologist or a therapist if the student was too difficult to teach?
No, I've never had that experience. I do make it I'm mistaken as a life coach sometimes as I'm coaching people, but I'm not really that. And I make it very clear I'm not a therapist. Mm-hmm. But I've never been in a situation where it was, where someone was in a space where I needed to suggest. Actually, take that back. I do suggest therapy anyway. I think it's good for you to have a therapist. But I mean, at a point where it becomes,
like I can't work with you. Yeah.
or unsafe for me. I've honestly never had that experience before. So
Yeah. I think therapy in conjunction with anything that you do is probably a good idea. Most
right,
of the time.
yeah, yeah. It's good to be able to talk to someone. It's good to be able to get it out. And I think what
Yeah.
happens a lot of coaching is that people get a chance to speak. They get a chance to talk. They also get a chance to be heard.
Hmm.
So I think that that's all, very important part of communication, to be heard and to listen.
Absolutely. Well, we do have one question that was sent in ahead of time, and that is from Bite Mark, and she would like to know, what is your favorite poem?
Oh, wow. That is a hard one. Well, I would say my favorite poem is a song of myself by Walt Whitman.
Okay.
My favorite, I have several poets that are, Langston Hughes
Mm-hmm.
is one of my favorites, but also a Sufi poet, Hafez and Rumi
Yeah.
are other poets that are my favorite.
I like we haven't had the Walt Whitman one before, so that's a good one. Let me post a link to that one. We've had people say Rumi. We've had people say Langston Hughes before, but that Walt Whitman one in particular, I don't think we've had anyone say before.
I think he was, a 19th century spoken word poet. Was it? I think I might be paraphrasing. A song of myself, and I celebrate myself, and what I assume you shall also assume. For every atom belonging to me is good, belongs to you.
I think that was verbatim, actually.
Oh,
I think
um,
that was pretty spot on for the beginning part of that. Yeah. All right,
yeah.
well, we've got a couple more questions here. So, Chad, if you have any more questions that you want to pop in, make sure that you write them in there into the Twitch chat or the YouTube chat, either way. And Darius, what is your favorite life hack?
My favorite life hack.
Yeah.
You mean? Can you give me an example of what you mean by that? You mean like
It could
something
be
that I?
anything. Well, it could be like a specific thing that helps you focus, or something like
Oh,
freezing grapes to put into your white wine, or something related
oh,
to mental health, or something related to
oh,
bouncing batteries to see if they're dead. Just anything that's like, oh,
my,
this is something cool.
oh. A venti dark roast with 2 extra shots.
Oh boy. Oh boy. We're going to be wired.
uh, I would say, to be honest, I need inspiration.
Mm,
So wherever I can get that content,
yeah.
YouTube, podcasts like this, wherever I can get that content, I gotta have that inspiration, because it fills my day with life.
Yeah.
So that is truly my favorite life hack. But I got to start off with the venti dark roast, 2 shots, 3 raw sugars, cream on the side, and a venti ice water.
That is so much caffeine. I would be just vibrating, I think.
That's
But
just
if
the beginning.
that's what you need, that's what you need. That's fine. Takes different
I don't.
levels for everyone, so for
Mm,
sure.
I don't
Do
get it.
you think doing stand-up comedy is a good way to get someone used to speaking in public? Ooh, that's a good question.
I don't do stand up, so I really can't. I can't say that. I will say that it's one of the most courageous art forms is stand up comedy. Um, I do know that there are comics that have used stand up to help themselves. That was therapy for them. So I think that if you're resonating with that, I mean, really resonating with that, hey, try it. You know what I mean? And if you really feel it, get up there and try it. And you may have some uh moments where it doesn't work out, but you should know, even the great comics, they go on stage and they bomb often because they're
Mm-hmm.
testing out. We just don't see it. We don't see it till it gets to Netflix. But
Yeah.
before it got to Netflix, it went through a whole series of small dives where they were practicing their material and it wasn't going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get up in front of people and they're not laughing, it's okay. Just keep going for it. Keep going for it, because eventually you'll discover, you'll just get better and you'll discover. So if I want to encourage you to do it, if that's where you're resonating, I can't say for myself because I haven't done it, but I do know that there are comics that have become comics because they used it as therapy. So
Yeah, absolutely. What is something you need to work on in your public speaking if you're being real critical of yourself?
I would say the thing that I need to work on is vulnerability. Yeah, to really be more in touch with my emotions moment to moment. I'm pretty strong on inspiration,
Yeah.
so I don't know how much I allow for myself. Um, as I incorporate more acting technique into my storytelling and my presentations, I think I find my way into more vulnerability that way. But I think in general, the vulnerable part is an element to my speaking that I feel like I need to continue to work on. Which is not easy as an actor, and it's not easy as a speaker because it's revealing. But it's
Yeah.
one of the things important to do is to allow for yourself to reveal. And so I would say that would be one of the main things that I would work on more often is the revealing of my vulnerable self.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that because I feel like a lot of what you share is inherently vulnerable. But
Hmm.
to say like you've got to get in your own feels, because yeah, you can share stuff and not actually be vulnerable in that moment, even if it is something that on the other side really seems vulnerable. So just kind of connecting in with that emotion within yourself. Yeah, I could see that being
Yeah.
a challenge and something that you would probably have to continually work at. I mean, honestly.
Yeah. I think so. And I think I have such a resonant voice. One of the things that
Mm.
I have to work with other speakers that have resonant voices is the monotone. So I would say too, finding more vocal variety when I
Ah,
speak is something that I'm working on. I need to work on more, but I would say that would be the other thing that I would work
yeah.
on.
Yeah. Well, it is time for the magic moment. If you could, and I have one right here, if you could wave a magic wand and eliminate one common opinion or misconception or theory surrounding mental illness, disabilities, or talking about mental health in general, what would you eliminate?
Um, I would eliminate the idea that it's that person's fault, that they're responsible for their illness. I think because we think that when people are dealing with mental challenges, that is something they did wrong or something they did to themselves wrong, or maybe they've wronged other people or whatever the case may be. And so we then are more judgmental toward them,
Mm.
not realizing that it's like saying if you had cancer um or you accidentally ate something, right? Or even if you drank something, right, that made you super sick, that you did something bad, it's your fault, you deserve to be sick, and there's no compassion there. It's how we treat people that are dealing with mental challenges. And I would say I would like to wave that away, to realize that person is suffering, um, and it's filled with pain, and we need to look at it like how if somebody was hit really hard or shot, or there was a knife in them, and that they're just suffering and they're trying to live life without dealing with the wound or the knife or the what have you, is something that I would like to wave away, that we wouldn't put that on the person that's dealing with such a tremendous challenge. So
Yeah, very well put, for sure. Well, Darius, I'm just going to open it up to you and see if there's anything that you want to talk about that we didn't cover. That was all the questions in the chat that I saw, so I'll just give you the floor. I will post your socials one more time. So if you're looking to connect with Darius on Facebook, LinkedIn, Threads, Instagram, his website, any of that, I'm going to go ahead and post those, and I'll just turn it over to you for a minute.
I would say, the thing that I've spent so much of my life, like I've only been happy, not even a decade. That's the truth. I spent most of my life full of depression, anxiety, anger, frustration, and a lot of it has had to do with lack of self-acceptance and really trying to be something I'm not, spending a lot of my life trying to be something I'm not, and looking for acceptance from other people, which is natural to do as a human being. But it wasn't until I became more free of that, I can't say I'm completely free, but more free of that something else opened up to me, a whole other world of possibilities. Had to get sober first. We didn't talk about that. I've been sober for almost 15 years, but I had to do that first. But once I did that, to learn to love myself one step at a time, day at a time. And so I hope that your listeners out there, if they don't already, that they could consider that, accepting yourself, loving yourself. And of course, if you're struggling with depression, anxiety, loving yourself enough to do something about it. And then also too, if you're struggling with substance abuse or any kind of addiction, that you don't do it alone, that you get help and get clean, because from that space is where things can really open up and a whole other world of possibilities can open up for you. So that's what I'd like to leave with y'all.
Yeah, I think that's completely something that more people need to give themselves a little bit of grace on. You don't have to do things alone. You can find people who are going to support you. Reach out to those around you, and if those around you aren't supportive enough, then go online and find some new people.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole world of people who are just here to support one another, and it doesn't always seem that way when you're in that moment. So find the people who are going to support you and surround yourself with them for sure. Well, What's Good says this was a great discussion. I never heard of Darius Wallace before. I'll be sure to check him out. My wife does storytelling at her job. She would benefit from this. So thank you. Yeah. And I'll echo. Thank you for joining us tonight. This has been a beautiful, beautiful conversation. I'm so appreciative of you taking the time.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. I felt from even your emails that it was going to be a great moment. I was like, wow, she's really enthused about this. I can feel it through her email. So thank you. And I hope this is not the last time. I hope we can do it again.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, that wraps up today's episode. I want to thank Darius Wallace for sharing his time and insights with us. I think there's a lot we can take from that conversation. Storytelling isn't just something we do for entertainment or to pass the time. It's a tool for communication, connection, and honestly, survival. As we talked about, it's a great way to own your story, to process your experiences, and to share them in a way that helps others and yourself. Whether you're out there trying to make sense of something difficult, or you're just working on being heard in your day-to-day life, the power of storytelling is real. You don't have to be on a stage or give TED Talks to make a difference with your words. We all have stories worth sharing, and those stories can shift how we see ourselves and how others see us. Even when life feels overwhelming or out of control, learning to tell your own story, your real story, can be a game changer. One of the biggest takeaways from today is that communication isn't just about talking. It's about listening. It's about being vulnerable, and it's about finding balance between sharing and receiving. Darius broke it down in a way that makes it clear. Storytelling isn't just a skill. It's a way to build stronger connections with the people around us and with ourselves. So what are you taking away from this? Think about how you communicate, whether it's your relationships, at work, or even when you're just sitting with your own thoughts. Are you telling the story you want to tell? Are you letting people see the real you? And are you listening to the stories others are sharing with you? These are all questions worth sitting with as we move forward. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a review or a comment wherever you're listening. It helps others find the show, and it helps me stay motivated to keep bringing conversations like this one. And if something Darius or I said really resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with a friend, post about it, or shoot me a message. I love hearing from y'all, whether it's feedback, questions, or your own stories. You can find me on all the socials as MommaFoxFire, and as always, I encourage you to keep the conversation going even after the episode ends. Your voice matters, and I would love to hear how storytelling plays a role in your life. Thanks again for tuning in. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I'll see you next time on Even Tacos Fall Apart.